Have you ever taken a drive home, say it's from the store or from work or wherever, and you get all the way home and somehow all of a sudden you kind of like, hey, I don't even remember that drive. Have you ever had that experience where you're like, that's bizarre. I mean, how did I get home? It just happened, right? Well, that's a really simple way of acknowledging or realizing that you were sort of sleepwalking, right? You were really not present for that whole entire experience, whatever was going on. More than likely, you were caught up in your head, right? This is a very extreme way of awakening to the fact that we do this. We do this in all sorts of ways in different aspects of our life. And it's actually quite alarming the more that you pay attention to it. But the more that you pay attention to it, the closer you are to waking up. So before I get started, I want to encourage you, please, if you enjoy these videos, to click the subscribe button. Click that little bell icon that lets you know when I release new videos. Like the video, leave a comment. These things are very helpful as I'm growing the YouTube channel. It's doing great. I'm so excited about the whole thing. If you're watching on Facebook, like my Facebook page, like the video, leave a comment. It's very helpful, and I'm grateful from the bottom of my heart. I really mean it. So now, on to sleepwalking. How is it that we go through our lives sleepwalking a lot of the time? Now, one of the things I want to point out right away before we go into how it happens is the fact that it does, like that scenario, I use that because it's such a great example of this simple thing, right? Like driving a car is quite a complex abundance of things that we have to pay attention to, right? I mean, it's really do you remember when you first started driving? It was overwhelming, right? There's so many things to pay attention to. And this just goes to show you that it can be done, right? I mean, in other words, you can get from the store or work home and not even realize or not even remember how. How did you do all those functions and you weren't even really conscious of them? Well, this is our habitual mind, right? This is how we've become accustomed to. We've trained ourselves in a certain way. And this is to do with driving cars, but in a strange way, we do this with our entire life, or our entire life, really. I don't want to alarm anybody or sound too dramatic, but it's really quite true. And I think we'll get to see this. So now let's kind of get into how does this happen, right? Now I had another video I've had a couple actually about this, but I'm thinking of the ones about ideas and ideals. And I talked about how at a certain age we start considering ideals and we develop ideas about these ideals, right? And I said that this usually happens, I don't remember exactly what I said, but it's somewhere between the range of the age of 15 and 25, right? We start to contemplate life at maybe a slightly deeper level. We're trying to figure out what's going on. We're starting to realize that maybe there's ways that are better to do things than others. This comes down to the idealistic thinking, right? Like thinking that there's got to be a better way. Right? There's got to be something that I can do better than they've done before, or that sort of thing, right? We're striving for the ideals, and we come up with ideas about it. Now, what usually happens, as I explained in that other live stream, is that right around the age of 25, I mean, it changes different for everybody, obviously, but we stop considering those things so much and we just kind of assimilate the ideas that we've come up with, right? We fall back on those. So when we do that, we start to, I don't know if you could hear it in the words, right? We're falling back. We're not really moving forward anymore. We're going back to a time, we're sticking to something that we discovered and we understood when we were young. Now, the fact is, after a little while, that's not necessarily true anymore, right? We change. I remember the example I used is if we expect our marriage to be the same at 10 years in as it was the first year, we're going to be severely disappointed. We're going to have problems because the marriage is different. We're different. Our partner's different. Our lives are different, right? So sticking to the same ideas doesn't really work that well. And this is how we start to develop habits, right? This is the thing I talk about in the description for this video. I started saying, I quoted Warren Buffett, I think that, the chains of habits are light at first until they become so heavy that they can't be broken or something like that. This is kind of what I'm pointing to. The fact that as we developed, as we came into these ideas, we started to fall back on them, right? We started to rely on the ideas, and we started to form habits around these ideas of how things are, how things should be, how we are, who we are. This gets down to even more fundamental things, And there's a certain, we stopped looking into this at around that age because it's very natural, right? I'm certainly not trying to make anybody feel bad about this because this is very, very common. I mean, it's almost hard to imagine how it couldn't be that way, right? At that age, around 25-ish, right, we start to really get into our adult life, right? We get a partner, we buy a house, we start a career. When we first began, way back when we were babies, we didn't know how to eat, right? We couldn't even feed ourselves. So that was what we became really consumed with, right? Just taking in the outside world, what to do. This is our development, right? How to walk, how to talk, how to read. That's why right around 15, we've kind of got all those basics, how to socially interact, right? And right around 15, we're starting to get that all worked out. We're just really getting in the groove, you might say. And that's why we start considering bigger things. At the age of 25, we start to move into our adult life, and it starts to consume us in a way that we actually couldn't even conceive of prior, right? I mean, if you get married and have kids, it changes everything. There seems to be very little free time, am I right? So it's easy to see how we would fall back on the things that we came up with at an early age. The problem with this is that it doesn't work, right? This is the thing. If it did, it would be great. If habituating our lives worked, that would be fantastic. End of story. We wouldn't have to have a discussion like this. But at some point in our life, sometimes sooner, sometimes later, we're faced with the fact that it's not working. I've talked about this many times before, right? It's when the partner comes to you all of a sudden and says, I think I want a divorce. And you're like, what? That only happens, by the way, if you're sleepwalking, right? How could you not notice that your partner got to this place? Now, you probably did, but you chose to ignore it. You chose to sleepwalk through it. This also happens when our child all of a sudden has some really big problem, right? They've been busted with drugs or got in trouble with the cops or something like that. All of a sudden, what? Now, the truth is, we probably knew, but we were sleepwalking a bit, right? We somehow got from the store to the house and weren't really paying attention. But all of a sudden, something wakes us up. It's a wake-up call. This is what I call the merit, the usefulness of the things that we would just as soon avoid, right? I mean, who wants to hear those words, I think I want a divorce? But if we don't hear them, sometimes we could just sleepwalk through our whole entire life. And while that sounds good, what you realize after you start to wake up, what I've discovered in my marriage, what I have hopefully helped other people discover in theirs, is that if you start to wake up from this trance that you put yourself in, you realize there's so much more. There's so much more depth to your relationship now because you almost got divorced, right? If you get your way through it, if you start to wake up, if you start to realize the habits that you formed. This is part of why it's so useful to take on a spiritual path. I didn't say this, but by the end of this conversation, I want to share 2 things that you can do that can help you wake up a little bit. One of them is just fun, honestly, and the other one is very fundamental. Can completely shift your experience to reality or your conscious awareness. So here we are. We've had some sort of wake-up call, right? In other words, the job ended because we weren't taking care of it. We were taking it for granted. I mean, there's the list. We are suffering from depression or anxiety. These are clear signs of sleepwalking, honestly, of not understanding something and not taking the time to figure it out, to look within, as I would say. That's with a usefulness. Nobody wants to feel depressed. Nobody wants to feel anxious. Nobody wants to have a compulsive disorder, right? But when we have them and we open to them, we see that they're actually delivering us a great gift because they give us the opportunity to wake up. to wake up. Another part of how come these habits happen, and right around, now they really start to happen right around that age too, around the 25. It could start even in your late teens into your 20s, but at some point, we get into routine, right? It's necessary. It's just, how do you avoid it? You have a job, you have to support yourself and help support your family, and you get a routine. You have a certain way of going about your everyday life. And the reality is, if you're doing this Monday the same thing that you did last Monday, and the same thing that you did with the Monday before that, and then Tuesday comes around and you're doing the same thing that you did the last Tuesday, and then Wednesday the same as the last Wednesday, you are starting to habituate your life. Again, it can't be avoided totally, but this is part of how it happens. Because if you're doing the same exact things all the time, something else is almost guaranteed to follow. You're going to have the same thoughts you had. If you're having the same thoughts, you're almost certain to have the same emotions you had. And if you have the same thoughts and emotions, you're almost guaranteed to behave the same way. Your life becomes a routine. It becomes a certain pattern of behavior. And when we live that way, as I've already said, at some point, life is going to give us a wake-up call. That's what happens when your partner comes to you and says, I think I want a divorce. You were so busy just following that routine. What happens is you don't act anymore. You're not proactive. You're reactive, right? You're always reacting. You're always just doing the thing you did before. And again, if that worked, you would never hear those words from your partner. You would never have those challenges with, work, or not at that level, especially. You would never experience depression, honestly. Believe it or not, if you can live open, available, aware, you won't experience things like depression or anxiety. And if you do, I don't want to say that you never would, actually. It will come and go. It won't be something chronic that's haunting you, that's plaguing you. Again, I've already said it, but I want to say it again because it's so beautiful to me. That's really what it is. I suffered from depression for a long time in my life. I'm so grateful for it now. It woke me up. There's things that I'm struggling with in my life right now to this day, and they're a struggle. And I don't overly enjoy that struggle, right? But there's a place in me that knows it's necessary, and I'm grateful for it. I'm learning, right? And I'm willing to look at this thing that I'm struggling with. And because of that, I can grow from it. Because of that, I have the opportunity to broaden more, to become more conscious, to awaken to this thing that's troubling me, right? There's something I'm missing. There's something I'm not seeing clearly enough about my own life. And therefore, I'm finding this struggle, this thing I'm not going to share the detail, but the thing I'm struggling with is something that's been going on in my life for a long, long time. And if I don't look at it, if I'm not willing to look at it, it will just keep repeating. I know because it does, right? So I am grateful for it because I know what awaits me on the other side. It's something deeper and richer and fuller. I'm almost excited about it because I know that that's what happens if I remain open, if I try my best to be clear. So I could talk a lot more about how habits are formed, how we habituate our lives, how we sleepwalk. I think that's relatively clear enough. And I encourage you, I can't believe I actually remembered to say it this time. If you have any questions, please ask it. I look forward to answering it. So if I didn't say something that you were wondering about, or there's something left unclear, or you've always wondered about, please ask. I look forward to hearing that question if you have it. Until then, I am going to talk about the two things that I want to share, okay? Now, the first one, as I said, is kind of a fun thing. This isn't going to change your life necessarily. It could be the start, But it's more of a trick, right? It's more of a, tips and tricks sort of thing. It's not really a fundamental core thing. These are not things I usually spend a lot of time on because I'm more interested in going very deep, right? But I have found merit in my own life and in helping other people too. So I remember talking to somebody who was struggling with their marriage and struggling with their family, and there was a lot of stuff going on. And I remember him sharing with me that, Adrien, it happens the moment I get home. The moment I enter my house, it all begins. The kids act a certain way, my wife acts a certain way, then I start to act a certain way. None of it ends up being very good usually, right? It's this big, at work I was fine. I get home and all of a sudden it just all falls apart. And I said, do you go in the front door? No, of course not. I park in the garage and I go in the side door, it goes into the kitchen. And I said, well, I got something for you. It's kind of silly, but I want you to try it. Go in the front door next time. Don't go in the side door. You always go in the side door. This is routine. Can you feel it? Mix it up. Go in the front door. Just for that moment, there's two reasons for this, and I'll get into that. Just for that moment, when you go in the front door, it's going to shift things. The family's going to probably be like, gee, Dad, why'd you come in the front door? You never come in the front door. Is something wrong? Or it's just different for you. All of a sudden, you see the house from a different perspective. You never come in the front door. Does that make any sense? Just that alone can help. It's not a cure. I can't stress that enough. But it's a fun little way to engage in something different, to shift the experience, to stop, to break the routine, the habit. Does that make any sense? Now, that's the kind of trivial way that it works. The deeper way is if when you do that, you take within your heart, and the more you can do this, meaning the more sincerely you can reach within yourself to access this willingness. If you do it because you're willing, because you have the intention, the deep intention to do it differently, that, my friend, will be powerful. So not only will you get a little bit of that, you just shifted things up, you just shook things up, that's useful, but you've also proven to yourself, in a very small way, it's not that hard, that you are willing to do something different. Now, granted, it's a small thing. You'll have lots more to do than that, and they're going to be a lot harder than that. But it's a start. It's proving to yourself that you have at least that much willingness. That's one example. You can do this throughout your life all the time. And I encourage it. Don't disrupt your life completely, right? But if you get home from work and you have this routine that you always do, right? You get something to drink, you sit down, you wait for dinner, you make dinner, and then you go and you watch TV. Do something different. If you're not struggling in your life, and I'm preaching to the choir in that way, it's still going to benefit you. It's good to break the routine. I have a very strong morning routine. I get up every morning. I do very similar things, almost exact things, almost every morning. But I always, probably once a week, don't. And I do that on purpose. I cherish my meditation time. I will not meditate. Just to switch it up. The last thing I want my meditation to become is a habit. I said in the descriptions that habits are, while there are good habits and bad habits, there certainly are, right? Drinking alcohol or doing drugs is a bad habit, right? It's not the same as meditating. Neither leads to freedom. Not meditation either, honestly. If your meditation becomes a habit, it won't lead to freedom. There's plenty of people, and maybe you're one of them. I know I've been. If your meditation routine gets screwed up, it screws your day up. You're not free. You're not free. Can you feel it? That doesn't mean don't meditate. It just means that you have a habit there and you're relying on that. You're being reactive. So hopefully that's useful. Did you have a question? I thought it looked like. Okay, so I'll take a question, then we'll get into the second thing.
We've habitualized so much. If there was one thing to open back up for exploration, where would you start?
We've habitualized so much. You know, maybe I was going to go there with the second thing. I actually, when I say maybe, I definitely am. So I so greatly appreciate the question, and I do want to answer it directly, but I think I was about to in a strange way. The second thing I was going to share, it comes back to the thing that I talk about a lot, right? Our thoughts, emotions, and desires. So the first thing that I would take on is at a level of, well, there's a hierarchy here for sure, right? First, you have to be willing. I can never say that enough. You really have to be willing. You have to be sincere in your desire to wake up. This is part of why the pain points are powerful. They're useful because often we'll just choose to stay asleep, or we won't even choose, right? We just do it. It just kind of naturally happens. The first place to work on, if you will, would be that willingness to realize that either one, my life could be more, if that's, or two, that there is something more to me, right? That I feel limited. And I don't like that word exactly, but I feel like there's more. And I don't mean more money and more job success and career success. I mean, that's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with either one of those things, but that's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about a deeper, richer experience of life. So being willing is huge. Then awareness. You have to start paying attention. So this is what I want to say in the second part of my second thing that I would recommend doing, okay? First, I would assume if you're watching these videos, more than likely you already are fairly aware of the fact that your mind is always busy, right? There's always a whole plethora of thoughts going on in there. It doesn't matter any given moment. The only time that we're not experiencing that is in deep sleep. You know, because even when we're sleeping, we're dreaming, that's just mental activity, right? So it's very rare for us to experience anything but our thoughts, right? So if you start to recognize that, that's very useful. It's very enlightening in its own way. Now, we could go really deep. I could go, into what's going on and who's thinking and all that kind of stuff, which is fascinating. But I don't want to go that far today. I want to keep it light in a way. I want to keep it practical. I want it to be something that you can actually do and that you will do after you watch this video. So there's a ton of thoughts. Some of these thoughts, they have a really clingy nature to them, right? If there's a lot of emotion involved in them, if it feels like they're really, really important because they have to do with your job or your money or your marriage, or these are tough thoughts to take on right away. So we're just going to put those aside, okay? I want you to find a thought. I want you to have the intention, be willing, start paying attention to a small little trivial thought, okay? Like maybe you've been going over and over and over this conversation you had with your friend the other day, or just a few hours ago, right? How many times do you need to think? Now, there was nothing wrong. It was just a basic conversation, but you were thinking about it. This is what we do, right? And you find yourself thinking about this conversation over and over and over again. The moment you notice it, stop. Stop thinking about it. Just let it go. Now, what's more than likely going to happen is it'll come back. That's okay. If you can remember, if you don't get caught up in it right away, let it go again. Just a small, little, tiny thought. Now, we're not trying to let go of this thought for all eternity or just for a split second. That's one example, right? Let's say you're brushing your teeth and you're thinking about what you're going to do later on in the afternoon, and you've already thought about this a couple of times too, and all of a sudden you realize that you're thinking about that again. Now, you already know what you're going to do. How much more thinking do you need to do about it, right? It's nothing important. It's just stop. Let it go. If it comes back, let it go again if you can remember. We're not trying to accomplish some big, great thing. We're just letting go of a single thought. A single, simple thought. Okay, so what's the big deal, right? I cannot even begin to explain to you the power of that simple practice. I actually thought about sharing it. The idea of sharing this simple practice with you came to me because I do that all the time. I'm constantly doing that, actually. And I can do that with things that seem really big and important because I've practiced this a lot. But it started with that small little thought because I couldn't take on the big one. So I just started to let go of little thoughts. Here's the thing about thinking. One of the reasons that you think, actually pretty much the only reason that you think that you are your thoughts, is because they never stop. I don't remember the quote exactly in my book, Seeing Beyond, but it's something like, I was talking about this. I was saying that there's one thing that determines who you are more than anything else, whether you realize it or not. Your characters, like your characteristics, who you think you are, your habits, as we're talking about today, your personality, even, believe it or not. There's one thing: repetition. Repetition. Now, I'm not saying that you didn't come into the world with a certain bend. I've proclaimed many times about myself, right, that I'm an extroverted, high-energy person. This is how I came in, and it's true. But it's not all of who I am. It was actually, the more that I repeat that I tell myself that I behave that way, that I don't switch it up, that I don't let go of that simple thought, the more it becomes true. The more that I let go of that, the more I realize there's more to me. There's more to you. Believe it or not. And repetition has more to do with that than anything else. I don't know if you caught that. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? That's habits. That's routine. It's just repetition. And somehow, and that's what thinking is. Repetitiveness. It's just this churning. I can't remember if it was Eckhart Tolle or, calling it the hamster wheel, right? It's just going and going and going and going and going. Here's the funny thing, too. Now that I just said that, a little teaching here about, you're going to let go of that little thought. It's not going to stop thinking, right? Because the hamster wheel is still spinning, meaning that it has momentum. That's why it's very likely to have that thought right again. It still spins. That doesn't matter. Because now we're going to get into why is that useful? Why is it such a big deal? Well, I already kind of hinted to it, right? I said that you never stop, but you just did, even for a split second. If you do this simple practice, stop thinking a thought, a simple, small thought, 10 times a day for 7 days, by the end of that week, you'll have shifted your consciousness a little bit. I encourage you. I'm challenging you. Try it. At least 10 times. More is better, right? But at least 10 times in one day, every day for 7 days. Let go of a small little thought. You're going to break the chain, right? In a way, or you're putting a chink in the chain. Does that make any sense? Like you're breaking that flow. You're interrupting that thing that's normally never interrupted. It's very powerful. So that's the first thing that you're doing, right? The second thing is you're proving to yourself and you're starting to awaken to the fact, whether you realize it or not, that there's more to you than that. Who's doing it? Who's deciding to let go of the thought? Thoughts don't do that. Now, you got to be careful because you can make this into a matter of force, right? Where you're trying to force yourself. That's why I want to start small and soft and gentle. Let go of something that doesn't matter. It's a simple little thing. Because there's levels and hierarchies to this too, right? I think I've talked about this before, but that range or that level that I'm addressing, this simple, small, silly thought that will just keep going anyways, even though it doesn't have any real purpose, it's just going on and on and on. That's the ego. That's the mental activity of your ego, right? It's just going, going, going. It's always got to, and it does this because if it doesn't do this, it does this because it has to prove its existence. This is a very complicated conversation, and so it's always acting like that. Now, that's one level. There is another level to the ego, and it's the superego. And that's the one you got to be careful of as you do this practice because it can start to try to dominate the little ego. We're not interested in any of that. That's all just ego. We just want to let it go. for just a split second, gently, easily. No fluff, right? Just do it. Just try it. Be still for a second inside. That's what'll happen. Now, again, it might come right back, but if you do that 10 times a day, by the time you've done that a little bit, you might get a taste of stillness, of silence, of space, the 3 pillars I'm always talking about to spirituality. You taste that, my friend, if you get a good taste of it, it'll change your life. It's totally changed mine. This is where the power lies in life, as I say, not the force. That's why you got to be careful even in this practice, right? Because you can turn it into some act of force, like you're forcing it. Try not to do that. Just be gentle with it. Have fun with it. Try something different. Switch up your routine. And let go of 10 simple, small, silly thoughts every day for 7 days and see what happens. You know what I would love? I would be so grateful for somebody who's watching this to do that and then leave a comment 7 days later in this video and tell me what happened. Maybe you'll say nothing. I don't know. I highly doubt it though. You switch up some routines, you let go, you break that route, that non-stop churning 10 times a day, you're going to experience something different. I know from experience, like I said, this is how my big shift really started. Because it was only once I started to put those little cracks, I love that quote from Leonard Cohen, it's the cracks are how the light get in, right? That's what was happening for me personally, and it could happen for you too. You just put that little crack in there. You stop that non-stop spinning. All of a sudden you realize that I can. And that little crack started to grow. Then I started to meditate in earnest, right? Being quiet 15, 20 minutes a day. And the cracks got a little bigger and I saw more light. I started to awaken. I started to stop. Does that make any sense? Sleepwalking through all my life. Then I started meditating a half an hour, and then about an hour is my common-ish time now. And it's just introduced more space and openness, light, if you want to call it that, in my life. And it's awoken me to things that I couldn't even imagine. It's just so silly. And it's probably, I don't know if it's appropriate to say, but I've thought about it many times sharing it, and I'm going to. So this just happened to me the other day. I have tea every morning when I wake up. It's the first thing I do pretty much. And sometimes I'll have a hard time figuring out which side of the tea bag, like I'll try to tear it and I can, and then I try this side until I finally figure it out, right? Been doing this forever, practically. The other day, I think it was too, because I was in a very quiet, still space, and I was just doing this. I wasn't doing it so routine. I was kind of very present. All of a sudden I noticed there's a little black square on the side to let me know that that's the side I'm supposed to grab and tear. I never recognized it before. I never saw it. I grabbed a different tea bag and I noticed it had 2 of them. And I thought, what does that mean? Oh, I probably misunderstood. Nope, that meant that I could tear it from either side. Now, this is such a silly little thing. But at that level, I felt a small awakening. Like I realized there's so many things in my life like that are sitting there right in front of my face every day. And I'm missing it because I'm not present enough, because I'm not open enough, because I'm not quiet enough, because I'm so busy just doing the habitual thing, right? Sleepwalking through my tea in the morning. No more questions? I'm really grateful to share this time. I hope that you take on at least one of these things. Either one or both, of course, would be great. I feel so certain that you will gain something from it. So as always, I thank you for your time. It's precious.